Welcome to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science Podcast. I'm your host, Tad Hussey of Kiss Organics. This is the podcast where we discuss the cutting edge of growing from a science-based perspective and draw on top experts from around the industry to share their wisdom and knowledge. Before starting the podcast, I wanted to update listeners on what's been going on with Kiss Organics and some of our future plans. We are in the process of closing down Kiss Farm, our 7-acre farm and feed store, due to issues with the county around permitting, but it's also been an impetus to refocus our energy around Kiss Organics, soil science, and research in cannabis. I recently brought Dr. Ben Higgins from episode 51 into the company. He is already a partner of mine in Kaizen Consulting and working over at Gold Leaf Gardens. I'm excited to get his help in expanding our in-house research through his connection with Gold Leaf and ability to monitor and set up experiments. In addition, I had double knee surgery a couple weeks ago and I'm slowly getting back up to speed. With our first child arriving here any day now, I'm glad to be moving around better and hope to continue the podcast schedule to the best of my ability. Speaking of upcoming podcasts, I have an exciting one coming up with Dr. Darren Kaplan. Darren was the first person in North America to earn a PhD with research focused on cannabis production. Dr. Kaplan has written and published several peer-reviewed articles on cannabis production, focusing on irrigation, growing media, fertilization, and propagation. So that's what's going on over here at Kiss Organics. We do plan on expanding the availability of our soils and products to a greater number of states come 2020. It took a few years, but we have gotten our soil and nutrient packs certified for use in organic production with the CDFA in California, Oregon Tilth, the Washington State Department of Agriculture, and the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And much of that was done with the help of my guest this week. Andrew Black is the Certified Kind founder and director. Andrew spent the last 11 years working for Oregon Tilth, one of the nation's most trusted organic certification agencies. Andrew has worn many hats in organic certification, including Farm Program Manager, Inspector, Final Reviewer, Latin American Specialist, and Certification Officer. Andrew has inspected hundreds of farms and food processing facilities in the United States and Latin America and has made certification decisions for hundreds more. He is an expert compliance reviewer for products certified to the USDA National Organic Program, plus the organic standards for the European Union, Canada, and Mexico. He also has hands-on experience growing plants in greenhouses, and for several years grew vegetables for 15 families from his small urban farm. He has also been an integral part in establishing the SunEarth Certification, which we discussed last episode with David Bronner. Now on to the show. Yeah, can we start off giving listeners a little bit of an introduction to your background in the certification world?
Absolutely. So I've been involved doing organic certification work since 2005. I started working as a full-time organic inspector for Oregon Tilth, which is one of the nation's oldest and largest organic certifiers of farms and dairies, food processors. And so I got involved, and during that time when I was an inspector, I visited hundreds of different organic farms throughout Oregon, Washington, California, and we had clients over in the Midwest. And also I speak Spanish, so I'd get sent to Mexico for 6 to 7 weeks a year and look at the farms down in Mexico. And so all that work, it was very interesting to see organic farming at different scales. So I started to do that work, and then I got involved behind the scenes at Oregon Tilth, helping to make certification decisions, to approve an organic certificate or to deny it, suspend it, revoke it, whatever needed to happen. And also, I started managing the Latin American program that we had. It's been a great way to actually get a deep dive into organic agriculture and food processing.
Yeah, now I met you, I don't even know how many years ago now. I'm going to guess 5 or 6 years ago through Jaya Palmer. He introduced us, and that was sort of my first foray into learning about certification. You've set up a certification called Certified Kind for the cannabis industry, and we're going to definitely talk about that quite a bit. But what made you interested in setting up a certification in the first place? And what are some of the challenges around that go into that process?
Yeah. Well, the idea for doing like a cannabis organic certification, that goes back pretty far. A couple of my colleagues at Oregon Tilth and I, had talked about the need for it within Oregon specifically. And then once Oregon started allowing medical dispensaries and for like the retail sale of cannabis in medical dispensaries, that's when it became clear that we needed to have some sort of certification program or oversight, because everybody was calling their cannabis organic. And to folks like me who care about organic agriculture, and have had organic farms and certifications, and also work to do inspection work and whatnot, seeing cannabis marketed as organic was when we knew that most of it wasn't. That was the motivation to start Certified Kind. We wanted to put truth in organic cannabis labeling, and so that's what we did. And the hard parts of doing certification. Well, everybody thinks it's easy to set up a certification program. Throughout the years, I've been approached a number of times by other people saying, "Hey, we want to set up we want to do an organic certification," or, "Oh, we're not going to get your certification. Maybe we'll start our own." And I kind of always laugh at that, because if you're trying to do a professional third-party certification, you really have to have these systems in place to be able to receive new applicants, and you have to have the experience to be able to evaluate the farm plans that they put together, and talk to them at a really high level about what they're doing, their farming practices. And not only that, but you've got to manage all this information that you collect, that you're using to audit them and hold their feet to the fire, when it comes to doing what they say they're doing and ensuring that they're actually farming organically. So I think there's a lot of moving parts to third-party certification. And, the best part for me is getting out on the farms and seeing what people are doing.
So there's a few challenges here, if I'm hearing you correctly. One is setting up the rules and regulations around a certification, because the term organic in cannabis is meaningless, because there is no unifying certification that everyone turns to. Like if we look at the ag model, you have, our foods model, we have, the NOP, the National Organic Program, that sets standards that then different states will have certifying programs that match those standards more or less. And then you also have OMRI, which is a third-party certifier. Can you just touch really briefly on what that model looks like?
Sure. So in the United States, we have the USDA Organic Program, and that's actually housed under the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service. And so the National Organic Program, which you mentioned, is responsible for sort of maintaining and curating the National Organic Program standards. And then that standard is used by accredited agencies. So the USDA will accredit third parties to act on their behalf to administer certification program. So there are around 55 USDA organic accredited certifiers within the United States, and there's about 50 outside the United States. And so the work of getting an organic certification, a USDA organic certification for your farm, your dairy, your food processing facility, that's done by these third parties. And so one of those third parties I already mentioned was Oregon Tilth, but there are others that people might know about, like QAI or CCOF. That stands for California Certified Organic Farmers. On the East Coast, there's private certifiers like New York Organic Farmers Association, et cetera, et cetera. So OMRI is actually only specializes in material review. So these 54 accredited certifiers, they specialize in actually certifying that a business meets the USDA organic regulations. And OMRI specializes in reviewing materials such as fertilizers and pesticides for compliance to the USDA organic regulations. So OMRI is a special beast, and there are a couple other OMRI-like institutions. One of them is called the WSDA, Washington State Department of Agriculture Organic Material Review Program. The other one is the California Department of Food and Agriculture's Organic Input Materials Program, the CDFA OIM. And they only work with fertilizers, by the way. So those three entities will do a material review and approve it for organics or not. And then those 54 other organic certifiers that work with farms and food processors will respect the decision of OMRI, WSDA Organic, or CDFA OIM, and allow farmers to use those materials.
That's actually really helpful. I didn't totally understand that in my head exactly. So hearing it is really useful. And I know, like, we hired you at one point to help us navigate, with Oregon Tilth and with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. And then finally, we just recently got our CDFA approval for organic materials. So on the fertilizer or soil side, and we register our soil as a fertilizer because technically anything that helps make a plant grow, they call a fertilizer, and it has an NPK value. So it's a little more convoluted on my end, but having those certifications I think is really powerful because it shows that my product is regulated, it's tested, and there's third parties that are determining the quality of it. And I think that third party aspect is really important. That's something that you mentioned that I want to just touch on. If for example, as Kiss Organics, I made a certification around it and called it, the Kiss Organic certification, and you used my products, I don't feel that certification would carry the same weight as if someone unaffiliated with my company created a certification like Certified Kind. I think that's a much more powerful certification because it's not linked to any products or another company, and that's something to consider when we talk about certifications as well. But let's dive into Certified Kind a little bit. So when you set up Certified Kind, you were looking to establish a certification that would be as rigorous as these standards on the agricultural side as well, correct? When we talk about material review and farms that would qualify and such.
Yeah, exactly. The goal of Certified Kind was to offer a professional third-party certification for cannabis growers, medical or adult use, that were licensed, permitted in their state to grow. So essentially what we were trying to do is to create a program that was very similar to how folks get certified on their organic farms, how they get USDA organic certification. There were a couple of reasons. First of all, we want folks to get the certification, and instead of using the term organic to market their product, we wanted them to use kind or Certified Kind. So we didn't want them using the term organic to market their cannabis because that's a regulated marketing term, and it introduces confusion into the marketplace. If people are saying, hey, this weed is organic, but there's no third-party certification or verification system in place. So certified kind serves that purpose. It's to verify that the farms that work with us get certified are actually only using organic approved fertilizers and pesticides, etc. Right? And it's interesting because you mentioned the KISS organic soils, and what I found through working with a lot of materials manufacturers is that not all the ingredients listed on a fertilizer or on a pesticide, not all the ingredients that are actually in the product are listed on the label. And so, and that's kind of what happens when you go through this OMRI certification or a good third-party material review, is that they ask for detailed information about the ingredients to verify that the ingredients that are listed on the label and also the ones that aren't are allowed in organic farming.
It's crazy how strict they are. I mean, the CDFA, I was hung up for 6 months because our source of neem, they sprayed a small amount, we're talking very, very small amount of molasses on the product during the production in India. And because I couldn't get the manufacturer in India, because I was buying it through a couple third parties by the time it got to me, they weren't willing to list their source for the molasses. The entire product failed. So I had to find another neem source where I could get the entire process laid out, which made CDFA a lot harder than some of the other material review certifications.
Yeah, it's amazing how detailed people get when there's like a standard involved, and it becomes, to a lot of people, it becomes very, black and white. Oh, they ask you about the neem, you tell them, oh, they spray molasses on it. Now all of a sudden you have to track down, where did that molasses come from? And so that's why, when people say, when they complain about OMRI, to me, or CDFA, they're complaining about OMRI not being rigorous enough or whatever. That's a bunch of BS. OMRI and the CDFA are very rigorous when it comes to material review.
See, I wasn't aware that OMRI was as that strict. I didn't go down the OMRI route because they take, as a third-party certifier, part of their business model is they take a portion of your profits as payment for the seal. So I chose to go with the CDFA and the WSDA for my certification. But one of the things I learned from you is that OMRI, if you see that OMRI certification on a product, it means that the product's been legitimately certified and you can trust that symbol, which I think so the good thing about OMRI, I think this is something we should talk about. So a good thing about OMRI is consumers recognize and know it. Growers see that label and they go, okay, it's OMRI certified. And that means that has value because they've captured a certain portion of the market. And, Washington State and California have that same power, I think, because they're a state regulatory body. People see that as having value too. But in the cannabis industry,
right,
we need a unifying certification, one where, and my hope, frankly, I may be fairly transparent about it. My hope is that Certified Kind and ones like SunEarth can be those certifications for our industry because I know you and I know what the value of the certification is. Because the challenge there is, one, you have to have good standards. So you have to have someone that runs it that understands what standards should be. And so you have to have the right standards. And then you have to have the right level of regulation. And that costs money. Farm visits cost money, but we need them to happen so that we can guarantee that what people are saying they're doing on their farm, they're actually doing. But can you just, I know I kind of rambled there, but can you talk a little bit about that idea of needing a unifying certification and the value of it?
Yeah, sure. So, in the food industry, the gold standard right now for a third-party certification is USDA organic. And in cannabis, it would be really nice if the consumer could look to just one certification label and say, okay, it's been certified by, for instance, certified kind. We trust these guys. We know that they do a professional third party inspection and certification all the way through. And that would be really nice, right? To be able to have something as powerful as USDA organic, that symbol. So for folks that care about these things, they could walk into a dispensary, ask for, hey, which products are certified, and the bud tenders would be able to point them in the right direction. I think it's interesting. I think we should talk a little bit about what does a certified kind farm look like.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Right before we do, I just want to add one last thought to your latest comment. And I think as a consumer, walking into a dispensary is a great example. So there are consumers, a lot of them, I'm sure, that listens to this podcast, when they look at products that they're not growing, they want to know that they were grown safely and in a manner that they'll want to consume. And so when I walk in, if I see all these different certifications, I may not know what each certification stands for and what their standards are and what the value of that seal is on a given package. So it's a process of educating consumers and having enough marketing to get out there that people know what it is, and then also understanding the value of it too. Creating a certification and putting a sticker only has value if that's backed by something, like you said, and some level of regulation and expertise. So yeah, let's talk about what a certified kind farm actually looks like.
Right. So just as in organic farming, the amount of commitment and dedication to like organic regenerative farming practice, it's a range. So, but there are certain things that are characteristic of a certified kind farm. So let's talk for a second about the outdoor farms, and then we can sort of talk about the indoor farms. So for an outdoor farm, what we're looking for is, first of all, a farm that's only using organic approved fertility. So that's soil amendments, organic approved potting soil, and organic approved pest control materials. So that's the first criteria. So we actually kind of have to deny a lot of certification requests because a lot of folks are using synthetic liquid fertilizers or synthetic powders that they fertigate in. And so that type of farming is that's not for certified kind. We don't work with conventional non-organic farms. A lot of our farms are doing things like using cover crops. For instance, you can use daikon radishes as a cover crop in the fall and in the spring, winter and spring. And that really can help to penetrate soils that have been hard panned due to cultivation or rototilling, right? And then when they decay, you're creating space and habitat for a lot of microorganisms and natural nutrient cycling. So on these farms, there's a lot of natural nutrient cycling going on. Now, the interesting thing with certified kind, we include indoor growers in our certification, and we hold them to the certified kind standard for the parts of the standard that are applicable to an indoor grow. And what I've been seeing a lot of, and of course you're aware of it, selling the KISS soil, is that the trend for an organic indoor grower is more raised beds and natural nutrient cycling within those beds, which is pretty interesting and unique. What I'm talking about, of course, is like your no-till soil. I don't know, that's not really probably the right terminology to use in a pure agricultural, horticultural sense. But these are soils that where you're planting cannabis cycle after cycle. The only thing that's really happening there is you're cutting the plant out of the bed. And we see folks re-amending the soil. But the interesting thing is that in that indoor setting where you have the perfect temperature and humidity, you see natural nutrient cycling that's off the hook fast, right? So somebody grows comfrey and does a chop and drop in an indoor grow, and it's gone really quickly. What's happening there? Well, microbiology is taking over. So anyway, that's a really fascinating thing about the indoor grows, and we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, what were some of the challenges with indoor grows? I know I was talking with Nate over at Gold Leaf recently, and he said one of the things that WSDA was stuck on or challenged with was how do they regulate CO2 being brought in and some of the methods for which that happens in an indoor operation and qualifying those things for organic standards. What are some of the other challenges with indoors versus outdoor from an organic certification perspective?
Okay, for a certifier that's working with the USD organic regulations, there are a lot of obstacles to certifying cannabis, and so one of them would be, do we allow CO2? So you're in like an indoor space where you're trying to add CO2. And this isn't really done in any other type of crop. There's really aren't a lot of indoor organic vegetables being grown, and they're not pumping the facility full of CO2. So carbon dioxide is not. First of all, they have to determine if it's synthetic or non-synthetic. Now, carbon dioxide that comes in a, maybe that's why there's some hesitation just to allow it. They probably are saying that that's synthetic and that it's synthetic CO2 is not listed as a farm production aid in the national organic standards. So you run into roadblocks like that with some of the practices that are common in cannabis.
So can a farm use CO2 supplementation with your current standard with certified kind?
That is a really good question. Currently, I don't think we have anyone that's doing CO2 supplementation at all. And if we looked at the standard itself, we'd probably find that CO2 isn't listed. But I'll tell you what, I can check and maybe get back to you on it because it's not one that I was just ready to answer off the cuff.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I'm surprised that hasn't come up yet because I think a lot of the commercial facilities would want to supplement CO2 in order to maximize yield, just based on the research out there around lighting and CO2 supplementation. So I'm surprised you haven't encountered that yet, but I know that there are these challenges associated with indoor environments that
another one like that I can speak to is sulfur, burning sulfur. So in an indoor facility or a greenhouse in an enclosed space, people have been burning sulfur or vaporizing sulfur it's a great way to control fungus and also like hip russet mites, broad mites. But burning sulfur is not something that's allowed in organic agriculture. You can use micronized sulfur, but you can't burn sulfur. So there's another spot there where organic rules don't really favor some of these cultural, practices that cannabis growers use indoors. Another one is potassiumsilicate, which I think you and I have talked about before.
Oh yeah.
But potassiumsilicate or agsil, a lot of growers like to use this in their as a fertilizer, to add to their potting soil. And it helps strengthen the cell walls and create probably a denser product that's less susceptible to powdery mildew. And yet using it that way is not allowed in USDA organic farming. So the point here is that these regulations that are in place for USDA organic are not, no one considered cannabis production when they were putting these rules together back in, when they were forming them back in the late 1990s and early 2000s. So it's going to be difficult for state, the state or the federal government to come in and try and offer organic certification for cannabis without some tweaking of their own rules. And so what we should look to, right, if we want to understand how the U.S. government will one day regulate and offer organic certification, we can look to what's going on in Washington State and also in California. Both the Department of Agriculture in those states are creating their own certification programs for cannabis.
So on that note, you mentioned like potassium silicate. It is allowed for use with as a spray, a foliar spray for pests, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, you're correct. It's listed as allowed in its aqueous form, so aqueous potassium silicate for pest control, disease control in the USDA organic rules in the national list. So a product like Film Matrix is an aqueous solution. It's been approved, DOMRI approved. That can be used. But the other material made by the same company, I think it's the same company called Axil 16, would probably get you in trouble with certification. And we ask, at Certified Kind, we ask people to stop using that.
So if you were to,
or they have,
it's a concentrated powder when you receive it, but you're mixing it with water into a potassium silicate solution similar to everything you find in the hydro shop. At that point, could you use the product if you're not putting it in its dry form, because it's too highly concentrated anyway to do so?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, you would have to say, well, I'm using this as a pest control material in its aqueous form, and the thing is that in the production of USDA organic certified fruits and vegetables, nobody's done that. So we've never seen anybody try and make the claim, hey, I'm using this potassium silicate powder, I'm adding it to water, and I'm spraying it as a pest control material. I'm making my own Film Matrix, basically, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of the argument you'd have to make, and then the certifier would have to receive that argument and then agree to it for you on your farm. But see, the current USDA organic certifiers don't have any experience with cannabis or cannabis growers, so probably they're going to just respond saying no, because they don't understand the life cycle of cannabis or the specific pest pressures or what people want to use and what they prefer. And so they're going to have a hard time fitting a round, a square peg in a round hole.
So take me through the process here. So if I'm a cultivator, I'm a grower, and I wanted to consider Certified Kind or a certification agency for my farm or my growing operation, what's the process with you guys for that? How does that occur?
Well, first of all, we require that the farm fill out one of our applications, and the application doubles as their organic system plan. So all organic farms are supposed to have an organic system plan that sort of describes how they're farming, how they're compliant to the regulations. And so for us, we have a Certified Kind standard that you can download from our website, certified-kind.com. And the application or the organic system plan document, it asks a series of questions about your farm and that are applicable to the certification. There's information that we need to know. What we do is once that's filled out is we do a really thorough initial review, and that's a formal step where we evaluate the application and then we respond to you saying, hey, these are the obstacles to certification. You would have to change X, Y, and Z if you wanted to be part of our certification. Or we could say, your farm plan looks excellent. Let's proceed to scheduling the inspection. So once we receive a farm plan, an organic system plan that is complete and demonstrates compliance to our standards, then we schedule the on-site inspection. At the on-site inspection, we look at every facet of cannabis production. This on-site inspection, that first time, usually takes between, I would say, 4 to 5 hours. And at that time, we're also, with certified kind, we take a leaf tissue sample and we'll send it to a lab that tests it for pesticide residue of over 240 metabolites. And so that's one way that we try and put teeth into this program so that we're not only verifying through observations on site that there are no pesticides at the facility or at the farm, but we're taking this tissue sample and testing it. If they had applied anything for, any pesticide over the last 6 months, or over the duration of the life cycle of that plant, we would catch it in our residue sampling. So that's kind of an extra step that a lot of cannabis certifiers don't do. I think we're the only one that takes a tissue sample like that.
Well, yeah, it's expensive, but I love it. I didn't realize a farm visit took that long. I mean, in my head, I picture you kind of like walking around. Well, I don't see any advanced nutrients on the shelf. I guess you guys are okay. And then you you sign off. That's really interesting that it's that detailed. And I love that you are taking that tissue sample as verification. I think that's really a key component to all of this really being successful.
Yeah, it's been interesting. We haven't gotten a positive result back on the leaf tissue sample in quite some time. When we first started, we got a few positive test results from outdoor farms, but it was such a minor concentration, that we suspect it was from like neighboring drift from a neighboring land use. So pesticide drift, or the guy was using some spray tanks that he had used in his landscaping business that weren't cleaned out properly. So, I don't know. The rules for pesticide residues in different states are different. Like in Oregon, they test for 59 residues, but we're testing for like 220, 230. In Washington, I think it's not even required for retail cannabis to have the pesticide residue test. You can opt in and choose to, but you don't have to. Is that correct?
That's a great question. As I understood it, there was some regulation that was put into place, and I could be misspeaking here, but as I understood it, most growers knew that it wasn't being enforced. And so there are sort of what happened was this one particular dispensary, Uncle Ike's in Seattle, kind of became like a third party check for people. And they've found that not a lot, but a significant number of farms have failed for things like mycobutanol and Eagle 20. And it's been really challenging here in Washington State, because at the end of the day, like, you're taking people's word for things. And that's what I like about certified kind with this tissue testing, is that you have some quantifiable third party data that shows, unequivocally that this material is clean.
Yeah. And, when you're developing a certification system, third party certification system, there is a lot of it that's built around trust. So this testing kind of counterbalances that. And it's the other thing about third-party certification is that if we were to certify somebody and then find out that they had been cheating using fertilizers or pesticides, or selling product that didn't come from their farm as certified product, I think that would be a huge hit to the farm's reputation as well. So, you have the force of residue testing, but also reputation. All these folks' reputations are on the line. When they sign up in part of a certification, they can be proud and say, hey, well, we walked the walk. We went through the certification. We passed. But if they end up having to drop out for some reason, that doesn't look too good.
So what you're saying, essentially, the idea is that a company, a grower is buying in there. It costs money for the certification, and you're not the cheapest certification out there for a lot of the reasons that you just listed. But if they buy in, essentially, they're buying into your certification, your reputation, that this certified kind brand has value because of the stringency and the regulations that you put in place. And so if they were to lose that because they cheated or something else happened, because that is, it happens, that potentially would hurt their company quite a bit. And on the other hand, by getting this certification, the idea is that as people, even more and more consumers start worrying about organic quality and how their cannabis and medicine are being produced, that cannabis will have a higher market value. So they can get maybe 20% more. I made that number up, but enough of an increase in their sales and the price of the flower that they're growing to offset the cost of the certification.
Exactly. And I think that's where so far the cannabis certifications have struggled. So it's been a struggle to get that price premium for the grower that is part of the certification. So with certified kind, folks are able to get a price premium, and they're also able to get into dispensaries that they might not otherwise have an introduction into, because they can go into a dispensary and the dispensary knows what certified kind is. Oh, okay, you're a certified kind grower, great. As opposed to, some folks have to approach dispensaries cold calling on these dispensaries. So the certifications can help make business connections. It can help prove to a complete stranger that there's, that they're farming in a certain style, a certain way, organically. And I think that, I should probably mention the SunEarth program, because one of the interesting things about SunEarth Certified, which I'm also a part of, is that they've been able to demand for the Brother David's brand anyway. That's the cannabis brand that David Bronner's has created. It's a nonprofit cannabis brand. They've been able to leverage a 10% price premium for their growers that are marketing with them. So,
yeah, I want to just touch on this. So your job as a certifier or a certifying agency, such as SunEarth or Certified Kind, is one, to make sure that the farm is doing what they say they're doing, that the product that's coming out of the farm is clean and, in theory, organic. And then your other job is to educate the public. So educate dispensaries so that when customers come in and ask, what's your safest cannabis, or what's your, cleanest, most organic cannabis, they can look at the Certified Kind or SunEarth certification as a way of knowing that product is going to be of a certain quality, or at least produced in a certain fashion. And then lastly, to educate consumers so that a medical patient or even a recreational user, like someone up here in Washington, could walk into a store and say, hey, what can I get that's organic, where that term actually might mean something. They could point to Certified Kind, or in California, Certified Kind and SunEarth. I think that's really powerful. So there's a lot of challenges associated with setting up a certifying agency like yourself that I think people need to be aware of. But let's talk about SunEarth. So SunEarth goes so far beyond organic standards. It's pretty incredible. I just interviewed David Bronner yesterday, and I'm going to be putting out both these podcasts really soon. Do you want to just give your quick take on it? Because we did talk about it already, and I know you haven't heard David's podcast, so you're kind of firing from the hip. But what's your quick 1 to 2 minute version of the SunEarth certification?
Yeah, well, if certified kind is helping to ensure that growers are following organic standards, SunEarth Certified goes beyond that. So it's a level up from certified kind, because they'll only certify or outdoor growers that are planting in native soil. So that means under the sun and in the earth, right? That's why it's called Sun and Earth. And there's 3 pillars to Sun and Earth. One is earth care, and that's the most rigorous part of the standard right now. The other 2 are community engagement. So it's human empowerment and community engagement are the other 2, and that has to do with having written policies for employees that protect them, and it has to do with engaging with the community. So right now, it's creating a written strategy about how you will engage and uplift the local community. And that way, the cannabis farms aren't just acting in isolation, not just exploiting land and resources, but giving back to the local community. So on the cultivation side, though, there's also additional standards there that make it pretty difficult. For example, one of the hardest parts is producing your own fertility from on-farm resources. So there's a requirement that requires composting on site, increasing biodiversity. So on these farms, so far, a lot of them are on the smaller side, but there are some that are around 40,000 square feet as well. And they're doing things like polyculture, which means planting cannabis and other plants together. One of the farms planted potatoes on both sides of their cannabis row. And I'm not just talking like one potato here and there, but like a full-on potato planting every foot for 300 feet on both sides of the cannabis row. So that's amazing. That type of commitment to biodiversity on the farm and growing food on the farm as well. Some of these farms, there's a farm down there that's SunEarth certified that only uses this plant, this algae, this blue. It's like a algae that has a symbiotic relationship with cyanobacteria. It's called Azolla. Have you ever heard of it?
I haven't done a lot of research on algae, but I'm somewhat familiar with what you're talking about. Yeah, it's an interesting subject for sure.
Yeah. Anyway, there's a farm down there that has a pond that's covered in Azolla, and they just take the Azolla out of the pond. It's that prolific in their pond, and they use that as a soil amendment, and they use water, and that's it. And so the SunEarth Certified program is trying to help these small scale family farmers in Northern California maintain their way of life, essentially. And the partner in that program is Dr. Bronner's, and David Bronner has his own nonprofit cannabis brand called Brother David's, and the farms that are that they put underneath that brand get a price premium and are pretty happy with the arrangement. And that's the other important piece. It's like if you're going to have a third-party certification, then we have to take care of the farmer, and we have to educate the consumer, like you mentioned. And so I think the SunEarth program is nice because it's going to raise the awareness of certification, the value of certification in California, and hopefully it will become a model where we can have more of a unified cannabis certification nationwide. And that model is really that these cannabis brands that are profiting off the farms themselves are paying in to help the farmers pay for certification. These brands are helping pay for education about why regenerative organic practices are important and why consumers should vote with their dollar and support these farms.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you have a company as, as wonderful and ethical as Dr. Bronner supporting you in this certification is huge. I think that goes a long way in really getting the message out for people. And the standard itself, I suggest everyone, even if you're not, thinking that's the direction you're going to go with your farm, I suggest people go out there and just take a look at it on the website. I'll have the links to everything on the podcast page for Certified Kind and SunEarth. But it would give you an idea of what standards are necessary if you decide that you want to be organic, or even if you're not ready to go there right now, but in the future, if you see, in your state that becoming something that has value, this is a way to set yourself up to be successful now. Because I know with SunEarth, and I need to go back and read the standards for Certified Kind, but I know with SunEarth, just like with the USDA, you need to have 3 years of organic practices on a property before you can be even considered. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. The way organic certification works around the world is they've selected 3 years as the transition period. So that's you need to have a clean land history for the 3 years prior to the harvest that you're going to be calling certified organic. So yeah, that means people need to plan ahead. But the other thing that's interesting is that in an indoor setting where you're coming in containers with new organic approved potting soil, you can decrease that time. So you can get a certification more quickly on virgin land or fallow land that hasn't been farmed in the last 3 years, or in an indoor facility with new potting soil.
Oh, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. And
right.
And just to be clear, you know my recipe and my soil. My soil would qualify. Kiss Organic soil qualifies for your program, correct?
Oh yeah, we have a number of the indoor growers are using your soil. Yeah, your soil qualifies for organic. It's WSDA approved, and it sounds like it's CDFA OIM approved. So
yeah, okay, that was my quick shameless plug.
and and I think we also got it approved with Oregon Tilth a few years ago.
Yeah, I really appreciate your help with all of that. Well, is there anything you want to add just before we sign off regarding what you're seeing on these farms, since you are visiting so many farms? Any potential pitfalls or stumbling blocks that are really common for farms that are interested in moving towards organic certification?
Well, yeah, a pitfall would be to not do your research, not do your homework. If you want organic certification, you can't rely on somebody trying to tell you or sort of convince you that a certain fertilizer is allowed in organics unless you absolutely know that it is. And so I see that a lot. It's like, uneducated people or people that don't really know what organics means, trying to convince managers or owners that a certain input is allowed when it has actually synthetic calcium nitrate in it, or monopotassium phosphate. So first of all, do your homework and get away from bottled nutrients, because a lot of the bottled nutrients do have synthetic chemical fertilizers in them. And the whole concept of organics is trying to enhance natural nutrient cycling in your soil. You can do that if you're an indoor grower, and you can do that definitely if you're an outdoor grower. I think that folks are starting to experiment with plant ferments, and a lot of the people that are deep into plant ferments, this is like Korean natural farming, they see higher or unique terpenes being expressed. But, a strategy in organics would be not to put all your eggs in one basket either. So I would say, although some of these things are trending right now, you always have to keep an open mind, but stick with what works for you, in organics. And so for a lot of folks, that's, if they're outdoor growers, you take a soil test, you evaluate it, and you apply organic soil amendments prior to planting. And what we learned with hemp this year was that if done properly, you don't need to apply any other amendment or fertigation step at all. And so devising like these simple systems is the best way to go. Like a complex feeding schedule isn't necessary, and it is probably going to confuse you, and you're not going to know how to tweak it really. I would say just, if you're trying to go organics, go as simple as possible.
I think that's good advice. And just to build on your previous comment, one thing I learned from being a supplier to the organic industry on the ag and horticulture side is you always want to check with a certifier before you apply anything. If you're not sure about a bottled nutrient or an amendment or anything like that, call up a certifier and double check those lists. So you can look on the OMRI list, and you can look on the WSDA and CDFA list and see if that product is listed. And if it's not, do not apply it without talking to whoever certifier you're working with, because it's much easier to go to not apply a product than it is to deal with the aftermath of applying something that wasn't allowed. So.
Oh yeah, that's the worst. It's the worst, because you get your land kicked out for 3 years for applying something that's not allowed in organics.
Yeah. Well, hey Andrew, I really appreciate your time today. I thought we covered a lot around certification, and I'll include your information if people have specific questions. But thanks for your time, and I hope people will check out Certified Kind and the SunEarth certification.
Right on. Thanks, Tad.
Andrew Black was Certified Kind and the SunEarth certification. Stay tuned next episode when we dive back into the science with some of the latest research in cannabis cultivation with Dr. Darren Kaplan. You were listening to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science podcast. I'm your host, Tad Hussey. Don't forget to check out our website at www.kisorganics.com for more information and resources. Sign up for our newsletter on our website homepage so you can stay up to date. Give us a follow on Instagram and leave us a rating and review on whatever platform you're listening on. Thanks.